What is the most unusual excuse you've ever heard of from somebody calling off work? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. I used to manage a small team at an IT help desk. One morning, my most punctual, reliable employee didn't show up. He calls me 2 hours into his shift, sounding genuinely panicked. I am so sorry, I can't come in today. I'm trapped. Me, trapped? What do you mean trapped? Is everything okay? Him. Yes, I'm fine, but there's a moose on my porch, and it's been sleeping in front of my door for 3 hours. I can't get out. I was completely silent, trying to process if this was an elaborate prank. I just told him to keep me updated. An hour later, he emailed me a picture from his upstairs window. There, magnificently and absurdly, was a full-grown moose, curled up and fast asleep on his front steps like a giant antlered dog. It's the only time in my career I've had to log active moose as the official reason for an absence. Answer: that's actually so cool. I would eliminate to have a moose outside my door. Imagine seeing one so close up. As long as it didn't wake up mad, you're in a pretty amazing position to see something not a lot of people get to see. ETA. Hey guys, I've seen a moose before. I know how big they are. I know how dangerous they can be. None of this changes how cool I think they are. Thanks for continuing to explain them to me though. Story 2. My grandparents had a medical emergency years ago where one got stuck on the toilet, and when the other tried to help, they fell and knocked themselves unconscious. My employer demanded details and didn't believe me because it sounded like an SNL skit. Story 3. A guy I worked with in retail 15 years ago called in to say he had a nightmare and didn't think he'd be able to get back to sleep, come in to work 5 hours later. Story 4. I emailed the office that I wouldn't be in for a few days because my then wife had had our son in the front seat of my car on the side of the turnpike. They knew he was due any day, and we were actually on the way to the hospital. He just came faster than we expected. I got an email back from a coworker with a link to a local news article saying, "I thought I recognized your car." Adi. Story 5. Years ago during the mob wars in St. Louis, we had a girl calling into work saying that she was behind a car that blew up on the highway. She was a known exaggerator, so we laughed it off. Turned out it was true. Answer: there's still mob activity in St. Louis. My former boss owned a linen service with a large number of accounts on the hill, all Italian restaurants, and those were handled by a special crew. Us regular workers didn't touch those accounts. Pretty sure more than just linen came and went on those trucks. He also bought a vacation home in South America and then got a bunch more Italian accounts. Story 6. I had a coworker call in, tell our boss he couldn't come in because his balls were so swollen from doing a bunch of coke and jerking off for 8 hours. My sister is a manager in retail, and she had on older women call in because her hemorrhoids were acting up and texted a close-up picture of her hemorrhoids. Story 7. True story, my female body part has a fever. I did not say this, but an older lady called in sick, and that's her excuse. Story 8. One of my daughter's primary school teachers had to take a day off because her beagle had climbed onto the roof of her house again. Story 9. Colleague rang my boss one morning after a rather important football match. "Boss, what would happen if I came into work tipsy?" "You'd be fired." "Right, boss. What would happen if I rang in and said I couldn't come in because I was tipsy?" "You get a written warning." Okay, boss. "What would happen if I didn't come in today but didn't give you a reason?" "A verbal warning." "Cheers, boss. I'll take that." Answer: that's like the time teen me went joyriding in my car in snow, doing fishtails around corners and stuff. Cop pulls me over and asks if I was driving recklessly or if it was loss of control. No lie, I asked him which was worse. He said reckless driving was worse. So I said it was definitely the other one then. He told me to just go home and he'd be calling my parents. Story 10. Back in my retail days, one girl didn't show up, so we called her and she said I forgot that I worked there. As in forgot they worked for our store, not forgot they worked that day. It was the most insane excuse I'd ever heard as a manager. She'd worked with us for like 3 weeks. She forgot forever because she never came back. Answer: so I used to work for a McDonald's that was part of a major truck stop on a busy highway. There were 2 of these truck stops, one on either side of the highway, literally across from each other, a northbound and southbound. I worked on the Macca's southbound location. We had hired a new girl, and her first official day, she just didn't show up. We're calling her. No answer. We call her parents, and they insisted they dropped her off to work for her shift. At the end of her allocated no-show shift, my manager receives a call from the girl who also insists she was at work, and she is in the car with her dad, now having been picked up. Thus happens the next 3 days, and on the 4th day, my manager is threatening to terminate. Well, you can probably see where this is going. Turns out Legheadaway Snoopy was working at the northbound location. But the strangest thing was, the managers over on the north side didn't bat an eye about this rando turning up on her first day. They just say a new worker with a fresh uniform, bag, and signed contract and put her to work straight away, figuring there was a glitch in the system and they'd sort out her payroll and employee number later. Not a single momager at the northbound location thought to look across the road and go, maybe you're meant to be over there? Story 11. Decades ago, had a shift runner for a pizza chain I managed in a large city, just no call, no show for 4 days. He came in to turn in his uniform knowing he missed shifts, thinking he was fired. He was a medium height, super quiet fireplug of a guy. He was 24 grew up in substances infested projects, had a wife and 2 little girls. Super responsible otherwise for like a year. The only thing he said was a few hours ago, he borrowed some money from a guy he came up with when he was out of work. He paid him back, but still owed the guy who was like upper management in a regional substances hierarchy. Anyway, he said he couldn't tell me and understood if I had to fire him. I didn't, and this guy was on time like always, and eventually became a store manager and moved his young family into a decent part of the city. I left the company and area not long after he got promoted. But it taught me how unreal hard it is to rise out of those situations, as there's always tentacles trying to pull it back. It's been 35 years, and I still think about that guy, know his name, and I hope he's doing well and has a bunch of grandkids. Story 12. Not work, but a college class with a pretty strict attendance policy. I delivered a message to the professor that my friend couldn't come that day because she thought one of her guppies might give birth. To prevent cannibalism, the recommendation was to separate the babies from the adults ASAP. Professors accepted this as an excused absence, lol. Answer: I remember this dilemma. You got shoot to do, but if you're unable to separate the mum into the isolation net before it starts, you have teeny tiny baby guppies everywhere in the tank, like hiding under leaves and behind rocks, and you have no idea how many there are. They can be smaller than a grain of rice, and you have to stay there and try to find all of them that you can, and then gently try to coax them into the catcher net. If you aren't fast enough, you have to watch while an adult fish notices it just before you do, and then you just feel so guilty and sad that you had to watch that. Even though rationally, you know it's the way of the world and it's wildlife in action, doesn't matter. You are now responsible for fish baby being eaten by its own dad in front of you. Stays with you. Story 13. Had a second shift QA job in my 5th packing house. Not a gov inspector, not on the line, not a supervisor, disliked by all. Morbidly depressed after 6 months. Woke up one morning, felt great, mentally, physically. Called in, I'm calling in well. I feel great, won't ruin it by coming to work today. Boss said I'll have to write you up tomorrow. Have at it. Sent out a resume, left a month later. Answer: I worked with a guy who had one of his employees do that once. One of the teenage part-time staff called in and said she wanted to call out well and asked if she could have the day off because it was a really nice day out and she wanted to go to the beach. But if the scheduling didn't allow it, she'd come in. He was impressed by the audacity and gave her the day off. Story 14. My wife called me from home while I was at work one day. I asked her why she was home instead of at work, and she said, I called in sick. I asked her what was wrong. She replied, there's a big bug by the door. We lived in garden apartment with only one entrance, and she couldn't get out because of the bug. I told her to step on it. She was too afraid. I told her to sick our Jack Russell on it. She, the dog, was definitely not afraid of bugs, so that's what she did. She took the dog over to it, pointed it out, and the dog went over to it, sniffed it, and walked away. Upon further examination, it turned out the bug was actually just a ball of loose thread. These are the dangers of not wearing your glasses, I guess. Answer: my wife is terrified of snakes. One somehow got into our house. We searched high and low and could not find the snake and assumed it had figured out how to escape. Nonetheless, she flipped over every piece of furniture and went as far as slicing open the bottoms of the couch to ensure Mr. Snake was not hiding. After 2 hours, we gave up and went to bed. She had a very restless night, convinced there was still a snake in the house. The next morning, I got up to make coffee. At the front door was the snake waiting patiently to be let out. I wished it good morning, opened the door, and it slithered off. It was a black racer, completely harmless, but don't tell my wife that. Story 15. Forgot to change my clock for daylight savings. We had this guy who would always be 1 hour late to work on the Monday after we changed the clocks. But the guy was an idiot. He'd pull this excuse when we roll back as well as when we roll forward. By that logic, you'd be an hour early one day a year and an hour late one day a year. Answer: Funny story about that. When I was in college, I worked part-time in the labs for my major. I liked to work at 8 a.m., woke me up for 9 a.m. classes. The earliest labs were at 8:30, earliest lectures were at 8, and most professors didn't show up until closer to 9 if they weren't teaching. Our department chair was one of them. My senior year, though, spring semester, I get to work at 8 a.m. one Monday, and lo and behold, there's the department chair sitting in her office an hour earlier than normal. Turns out it was daylight savings, and she'd forgotten to change her alarm. So she woke up an hour early and didn't realize it until she got to campus. Story 16. A colleague emailed me to tell me he'd be out of town and unable to review the materials I sent him. I was frustrated because I work in print publishing, and deadlines really don't care about your vacation. Checked in with another colleague to see if he agreed that I should follow up with him by phone regardless. It turns out he was not just out of town, he was in Antarctica doing research. Story 17. I once got to work and then got a panicked call from my dad that I needed to come back to my house immediately because he was stuck. He refused to provide more details. I let my boss know I would hopefully be back, but I'd keep her posted. I was worried because a few months prior, he had been in his backyard trying to practice karate moves on an old tree, and when he kicked it, the rotten thing fell on top of him. He couldn't reach his phone when that happened and spent about an hour trying to wiggle out of his pants so he could escape. I was assuming a similar situation may have occurred. I rushed back to my home to find out he had decided he wanted to come over and cut down tree limbs while I was gone. He decided to use a ladder to climb up on the shed roof so he had more area to work with. The only problem was he also brought my sister's dog with him, who promptly knocked over the ladder as soon as he got up there. Story 18. Someone called in a bomb threat at the Walmart across the street. Police are everywhere. I'm too scared to leave my house. Answer. I was taking community college classes at night after work, and one day had an active shooter around my apartment building, so I could not go home after work to pick up my school stuff. Instructor didn't even believe me, so got 0 for the assignment. It was in the days when we used floppy disks and the WW wasn't fully grown, so no instant news reporting. Oh well. Story 19. Does leaving early count? My mom closed the eyeglasses store she was working at. BC. A fly was in her drink and got in her mouth. Story 20. Ages and ages ago, I worked at Walmart stocking groceries. One day I was just worn out, so I called in and told them that I had apathy. My supervisor, who wasn't terribly bright, didn't miss a beat. He told me to rest up and be back tomorrow. The next day, his boss came over to me and said, I'm going to let that apathy thing slide because it was hilarious, but don't ever do it again. Story 21. I had an employee whose boyfriend stole her car when he got word the police were going to come after him for selling meth. The car broke down. Some good Samaritans stopped to help him. He stole their car and crashed it. Finally, the police caught up with them. Anyway, all she really needed to say is her car was broken down. Oh, and he also would sneak into the gated parking lot to try and sell meth. Once he got in the building somehow, we never figured out how, and flushed all of this meth down the toilet and flooded the break room and a manager's office. Story 22. I once heard a coworker called and sunburnt. Weird, but to be fair, she was very light-skinned, so I imagine it was pretty bad. Answer. I've been that coworker. My sister convinced me to try a tanning salon with her. The salon used improper settings for their bed, and I was very burnt after only 10-15 minutes of tanning. Once the burn developed a few hours later, I couldn't wear any clothes for at least the 3 days after. I worked at a fast food restaurant at the time. Putting the scratchy uniform on and sweating behind the counter while my skin was raw was not happening. Story 23. A co-worker was no call, no show for his shift. He'd been having emotional issues, so our department manager attempted to call him numerous times. After no response, he checked his home and then requested a wellness check from the local PD. No sign of him. A couple of hours later, the coworker called to say that his mother had died. A couple of hours after that, he called back to say that she hadn't actually died. He'd made a mistake. That was the last time anyone heard from him. Story 24. The person's overhead garage door remote wasn't working. Yes, they were aware that they can manually open the garage. However, that wasn't necessary. BC, their car wasn't parked in the garage. But the repair guy was coming to fix the remote, so they had to be there for that work. Story 25. I called out once because there was a scorpion in my bed that stung me 10 times and I was in a helicopter being medevaced. Called out once because a pack of javelina were encircling my car. Called out once because there was a mama cougar hanging out on my back wall, a baby on the ground. Called out once because a saguaro fell over onto my house and I had to prove to the feds that I didn't knock it over. Called out on 2 separate occasions because I got stuck in a hurricane and missed my flight home. Called out once because I was helping rescue a friend's horses from a wildfire that was moving toward their ranch. I think that's pretty much it for my wild excuses. I don't really get sick, so I don't call out unless I really can't get to work. Answer: what the fudge is your life? That's wild. The cactus and the feds are eliminate me. One time I had a scorpion get into my bed and thus sting me like 4 times while I was sleeping. I woke up, fell out of bed trying to get away, and definitely didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't need any medical attention, thankfully, but waking up to that was terrifying. Medevac plus terrifying rapid-fire stinging is the worst. Story 26. One guy said he couldn't come in because his goldfish was depressed, and he needed to be there emotionally. Answer: I feel this deep in my soul. My daughter won a goldfish at her elementary school spring fair. She named him James Pond. James went from a goldfish bowl to a 30-gallon tank. He was spoiled rotten, had an incredible personality, like a dog, and lived to 17. My 3 kids complained that their 4th sibling was the favorite child. James was my favorite, that's the truth. James Pond got depressed when we moved from the suburbs to the city. I kid you not. When he died, I had to take a day of bereavement. He would wake me up at 7 a.m. every day by spitting water out of his tank to make noise when the water landed on the wood floor. He would do fast swim laps and tail dancing when I'd come home from traveling away from work. He was such a character, and everyone loved him. James Pond, Story 27. An employee who rang in saying he couldn't come in because his dog had pissed in his shoe and he only had 1 pair. Answer: I had to call in late once because my jerk cat decided to jump in my dryer and piss in my work clothes. It was a Monday and I had washed and dried all of mine and my husband's work clothes that Sunday. I just hadn't taken them out of the dryer. He got up before me, took his clothes out, left the dryer open. My boss was skeptical, but I was like, if could have you smell my fudge dryer right now, I would. I was so mad. Story 28. Their neighbor's house was broken into and they shot the intruder. They couldn't leave because there was police tape all around their property and the mobile investigation vehicle was blocking their driveway. He said he heard what sounded like a couple of thumps early in the morning and assumed the neighbor dropped something. It was the sound of his neighbor's .357 revolver being discharged, followed by the intruder hitting the ground. Answer: I called in for something similar, but not so extreme. I lived in a duplex and my neighbor's garage caught fire. They had to shut gas and electric off for both houses, and they would not be turned back on until the fire marshal cleared it. I was in the AF at the time, and my elk did not like me. So while I had the day off, he kept bugging me to come in. I was like, I have to be here for the fire marshal. It's not like they make an app to it. This same light gave me shoot when I was trying to get a new place after the same house was being foreclosed. I was renting. He wouldn't let me take enough time to go look at new places. It worked out, but God, he was a male body part. Story 29. Anal glaucoma. When the boss asked, what is that? He responded, it's when you just can't see your jerk coming into work, and hung up. Story 30. It was opening day of the school year, and I was in our home office typing up my classroom expectations. Suddenly, I felt something on my head accompanied by a high-pitched scream. It was a frickin' bat entangled in my hair. My husband somehow got it out of my hair while I collapsed onto the floor, trying to breathe from the sheer panic. After a half hour of trying to compose myself, I called our principal and told him what had happened and that I would be late as my nerves had to settle down before I would be able to drive the 1.5-hour commute. When I arrived in time for my 3rd period class of nervous brand new freshmen and told them why I was late, the looks on their faces were memorable. Answer: your post reminded me of a time when I was in 8th grade. It was early fall and the wasps were still out. We're sitting in English class and a wasp decided to fly into my very curly hair. I didn't notice, but my teacher noticed. She gasped and told me to stay very still. She grabbed a cloth tote and just started wailing on my head. My dad, the JH principal, walked by and saw this happening. He poked his head in the classroom, totally confused. The wasp flew away. I was freaked out, but sadly, Dad made me finish the day. Story 31. I once had a coworker that was the sweetest person, but not the brightest crayon in the crayon box. She was running late in the morning and called in. We hear our supervisor laugh really hard. I happen to be friends with both of them. The supervisor shared that they were late because they said they had camel toe. We died laughing. The sweet coworker thought her broken toe was called a camel toe. We had a great laugh explaining to her what a camel toe was on women. Makes me chuckle just thinking about it. Story 32. Dude called in 3 hours into a 5-hour shift because he overslept. His reason was that the latest Call of Duty was released the day before, and he stayed up to 7 a.m. playing a video game. Boss told him to not bother coming back. The kicker: the shift didn't start until noon. Answer: I had to leave early one shift due to cancer causing me to bleed and soak my crotch. My coworker freaked out since he wanted to leave early and play Fortnite at 5 a.m. with his friends. This was almost 2 in the morning. I put my notice in a week later. I was considered an asswipe for not staying and covering. The shift didn't last too much longer after I left. Story 33. Had a weird woman that worked with us. She would call in saying she couldn't find any shoes. Called in because she left her clothes at the laundromat and wasn't able to pay for the dryer. She would leave at 11 a.m., come back at 3, or she went home for lunch and had to go to the grocery store for food. Had a flat tire every other week. Her prescription glasses were lost and she couldn't see to drive. Called out once because she got free Disneyland from her neighbor and they were about to expire. She wore weird wigs, smelled horrible. Her lunches at work were always odd combos of leftover food that absolutely smelled like a corpse rotting. Story 34. A co-worker once got in a minor fender bender and ended up going to jail. He caused the wreck and assaulted the other driver for fudge up his car, it seems. Also had a guy call in that he was snowed in. There were, maybe of him being generous, 3 inches of snow on the ground, and he lived less than a block away and the boss said okay. Story 35. Someone once called me and said he could come in because he got maced. He also called about 5 hours after his shift started. Story 36. I had a huge commercial truck with a bucket on top blocking my driveway. I took a pic and texted my boss the photo and said I would be late. Story 37. My sister was a school teacher and called in saying that she was feeling too well to come to work, but she was starting to feel worse, so likely would be in the next day. Unsurprisingly, they didn't renew her contract. Story 38. I got stuck in my garage once. Detached garage, and the garage door broke. I couldn't lift it by myself. I had to wait for help. Story 39. One of my colleagues said that one of his employees could not come to work because she was the getaway car driver when her boyfriend robbed a bank and they both got arrested. Story 40. A tornado touched down nearby and knocked a tree across my driveway, missing cars but blocking us in. We did not live in a tornado-frequent location, and my boss didn't believe me. This was before smartphones, so I had to take a pic, get it developed, and show him a week or 2 later to validate my call-out. Looking back, I could have just lied and said I was sick and saved myself the entire fiasco. But it was such a unique experience, I naively assumed it was a valid reason and would be interesting to share. Story 41. His dog was having intimacy with another dog. He tried to stop it, but it growled and tried to bite him, so he had to wait until it had finished and consequently missed the bus. Story 42. They didn't have any pants. They have 5 pairs of pants and they're all dirty. They rambled on about this for a few minutes. Answer: I had 1 pair of pants at one point, was going through weight change. I simply didn't have any more pants that fit. Sunday night, a friend came over for a couple drinks. The evening got out of hand. She spilled drink all over herself. Boyfriend and I put all her stuff in the wash, then in the dryer with my work clothes. For some reason, in her drunken logic, she didn't think we were going to give her back her clothes, so she took the whole wet pile out to her car. They froze into a solid ball. I had no way of getting the frozen clothes thawed. She also stole a clock from the wall in a photo album. I love her. Story 43. Back in my banking days, we had a part-time teller working at our office. She was 18, still lived at home with her parents, and I'm pretty sure this was her first job. The day after a minor snowstorm, less than 6 of snow, she called out of work with the excuse that she lived at the top of a hill and that her parents weren't comfortable with her driving down the hill to work that day. She was still stuck at home the next day. As it turned out, she never came back to work, and the bank security team had to send a registered letter to her home to get her bank keys back. Story 44. I had a girl call into work. Her dad was in a standoff with police, and her mother were requested to come and try to talk him down. I believed her as I had been watching the news that morning and was well aware of the situation. Oh, and the last names were the same. Story 45. I was a supervisor at a company. Somebody phoned in and said he can't come to work because the swells are unusually large and he needs to go surfing. This was Northeast England BTW. Story 46. I had a friend call in and put a towel on the phone. He said he had been abducted and put in a car trunk. Story 47. I had a coworker call in and say he couldn't make it in because he got stabbed 13 times. Another called in and said he couldn't make it in because he was hit by a car, but he'd be in tomorrow because he was able to jump and roll up the window. We had several people call in because their homes were on fire during the wildfires that burned the city up, including myself. We had a coworker secretly living in the storage room in the manager's office for about a month during that situation. It was insane. Story 48. I had to call off once because I got sprayed in the face by a skunk. And also once because I was in the emergency room from a tegu bite. And also once because a raccoon stole and lost my keys. I run an animal rescue though, so they expect that shoot from me. Story 49. My husband's colleague called in because he was too fat to get into his work trousers. He'd been on an all-inclusive holiday for 2 weeks, came home, and couldn't get his trousers up. His boss made him come in his holiday shorts and agreed that he did look a lot bigger and so gave him a few days off whilst they ordered new trousers for him. He had apparently gained 18 kg in 2 weeks. Story 50. I supervised a call center and our employee entrance was on the side of the building with one flight of about 15 steps. The customer entrance was in front, but to keep that area clear, we had employees take the steps on the side of the building. One employee, for whatever the reason, strongly objected to using the steps, gave a bunch of what-if situations under the assumption that we didn't come up with reasonable accommodation for disabilities. This was not the case, as we literally had someone who used a cane and was able to use the front entrance and elevator. She got to a point where she made a formal complaint to HR. HR told her what she needed to do to document any need for reasonable accommodation. Since she couldn't do that, she resorted to calling out, "My knee is sore, so I'm calling out. I worked my hamstrings yesterday and they hurt. So I'm calling out. I walked more than usual last night and my legs are tired. So I'm calling out." She eventually called HR and formally quit, citing the flight of stairs as her primary complaint. Story 51. A guy that spoke broken English told my boss, "I can work. You have hemorrhoids. We got the message LMO." Story 52. A former coworker was limping at our work in a depot, and everyone was wondering what happened. He left shortly afterwards. Turned out he got intimate with his GF and tore his balls during the deed. Story 53. She said, "I think I'm getting a headache, not I have one. I think I'm getting one." She called out multiple times her first week we let her go. She totally didn't understand why. Story 54. A guy who worked in the post office in Montauk came into some money. The next day he called in late because my hair is still wet. Story 55. I had a coworker call out because she ran out of toilet paper. She's probably still sitting on the toilet to this day. Story 56. I once couldn't go to work because there was an unexploded bomb found on my street. I lived at the end, so couldn't get round the cordon, and the army guy told me to stay indoors. So I did. Lovely day off. Told my fella to start digging in our garden, see if we could make it a long weekend. Story 57. I didn't call in, but got called to ask if I was okay because it was 10:30 a.m. and I hadn't logged on yet. I work remote. I had been diagnosed with a rare condition a few months earlier and nearly died, so he was truly concerned. Meanwhile, I had been in my backyard working on my landscaping for the past 2 hours and wondering why he was calling me on a Sunday. When I asked him that, he said it was Monday. I stopped and literally went over what I'd been doing the last couple of days and was still wholly convinced it was Sunday. Finally, I looked at my phone and saw that it was indeed Monday. Thankfully, due to working remote, I was logged on in about 10 minutes, still not entirely convinced it was Monday. Weirdest time lapse ever. Story 58. My ex-fiancée teacher phoned up to say she had a headache, and then rolled a joint and played GTA 4 all day. Miss you, Lou. Story 59. Coworker called in to take her mom to rehab. They found her in the woods at 3 a.m. barefoot yelling at a tree. It was 32 degrees outside. They didn't want to waste any time, obviously, LOL. Her mom is doing good now. 4 years sober, so good for her. Story 60. I had to call my boss and tell her I was going to be late because chipmunks had filled my truck's engine up with black walnuts. She laughed so hard I thought she was going to choke. Went out to leave, started the truck, and heard this awful sound. Opened the hood and the engine was full of black walnuts. Had to get the little stepladder out and spent 12 an hour cleaning them all out. Luckily, I was only about a half hour late, and it was the early morning stocking shift, so it was all good. Story 61. My coworker called in because the rod in his closet fell, and he wanted to fix it and rehang his suits so he didn't have to pay the dry cleaner to iron them for him again. Story 62. Once worked with a dude who called out because he had a huge zit on his butt, and it hurt so bad he couldn't sit, walk, do much of anything, lol. Totally valid. We worked retail, and it would have been a pain in the jerk. Pun intended. But man, did we make fun of him, lightheartedly, and told him he should have lied well now. Story 63. Coworker of mine. I'm pretty sure he didn't call in. He just never came back. He was arrested for a kidnapping on his way home from work. During the criminal investigation, it was discovered that he was also a suspect for the mysterious disappearance of a female gas station attendant and the shooting passing of a female jogger. He is now serving a life sentence. Story 64. I had to call in saying I have lost power and the emergency release is stuck and I can't get out of the garage. Pretty sure they didn't believe me and checked out the website for power outages had to believe me when my area popped up. Story 65. I have a coworker who took a whole week off because it was her birthday. As someone who grew up in a household where you go to work unless you're dead, one of my parents' mottos, I found this amusing. Answer. I mean, did your work actually support vacations? Cause taking a week off to do B-Day things using vacation time makes sense? If it's retail, when screw the company anyways, they don't even provide vacation time. If they just called out sick, leaving everyone to scramble, that sucks. Also, fuck the mentality of going in until you're dead. Have plenty of miserable dead family members that didn't live life because of that mentality. Employers that were happy to ruin their lives for money, it's not a virtue. Good work ethic is a virtue. Working when sick is not good work ethics. Do you think they guys that got divorced making IE a good browser are happy they did that? LOL. Story 66. Not a worker, but parent called in an absence for her daughter because the girl had worms coming out of her butt. Story 67. We had a girl ring the call-in number to let us know she wouldn't be in that day. 2 issues with that. 1, she called in to the wrong crew. And 2, she'd been fired 2 weeks prior to that. Story 68. Hurry, sure. In a Mother Nature has come to call me. Sorry, her, Mother Nature, me. Is that an illness or something? I just have to write something on the clipboard. Her. It's Mother Nature, so I wrote Mother Nature on the clipboard. Someone later informed me that means menstrual cramps. Story 69. A delivery driver at a small, local DME store called in because he had to go to a pool tournament with his buddies. I filled in his termination paperwork while still taking the call. Story 70. I had someone that couldn't control both ends of their body. It happens. But they decided to leave me a voicemail with every single detail and noise coming from their body in the background while they were leaving the message. Just call in sick, and I'll think nothing of it. Story 71. I once had to call out of work because the cops had blocked my driveway. Random cop car across the end of my driveway, no cops around, no way to get around it. Turns out they had an incident, and the one cop jumped in a different vehicle, ambulance maybe, and left it behind. Story 72. Back in 2015, I worked at a call center. I sat pretty close to the manager's desk and overheard a guy call out with dysentery LMAO. Story 73. Legitimate reasons I have used. Drop my keys in the dog's water bowl, that fudge up the remote and I couldn't shut off the alarm. Geese would not let me get to my car. Horses got out. Reasons others have used. Got abducted by aliens. Came in as soon as they let him go. Girlfriend is pregnant. Has to take care of it before wife finds out. Spoiler alert, his wife found out. Too tipsy to drive in the morning. Story 74. Not a call out, but the amount of people who call to reschedule their appointments when it's supposed to rain is insane. Story 75. A lady put mayonnaise in her hair to condition it. It didn't rinse out thoroughly with water. No matter how many times she rewashed it, it looked greasy. Story 76. I'm just going to admit one I used one time. I wanted to have more intimacy with my girlfriend instead of going to work, and my leg had gone numb for whatever reason. I thought I'd get the answering machine, so I didn't have any excuse ready, and my boss answered the phone. I told them I couldn't come to work because I couldn't feel my legs. It's one of those random memories that gives me embarrassment decades later in the middle of the night. Story 77. A manager who was let go from multiple companies but could always find a new position. He had a go-to list, and once he started a new job, he would use the list without doing any repeats. My favorite was, I saw a rare bird in my backyard and contacted the DNR. They need me to stay home until someone gets there from them so I can show them where the bird was and what direction it flew. Also on the list was, my garage door is frozen and I can't get to my car. If anyone got sick in the office, he would call in a few days later saying he must have caught the illness from that person, but his was always much worse and he needed a few more days off the original person. Of course, he had a list of relatives that died. He would sometimes provide a memorial card from the funeral home. It was always from the same funeral home, where his wife was a secretary. Not many people knew she worked, but he let it slip once to me. He lasted at the company I was at for almost 3 years before he was let go. Story 78. I drank too much coffee and I feel like crap. It was a 11/7 job. It was me. It was true. I was a phlebotomist, loved my job, but I worked with needles. I don't think any patient would have wanted me drawing their blood that night. Story 79. Just heard this last week. A co-worker said she felt bullied by someone from her team asking her a question on a department call. She went to lunch, then told her manager she was taking PTO for the rest of the day and the next. The question? Can you trade lunchtimes next Wednesday? Answer. I once had a co-worker get really snippy with me because I was dealing with personal problems. So I wasn't really up to answering questions. They weren't about work. It was stuff like, "Oh, what's your class essay about?" And so I told her, "I'm sorry, I don't feel like talking right now." She went to her bathroom and called her dad to cry. And then when she came back, she accused me of treating her differently than other coworkers. Mind you, she rarely saw me interact with other coworkers because it was always us two closing and no one else was ever around. Story 80. Why didn't you call and wake me up? Heard from a 20-something that worked for me. Apparently his previous boss would do that for him. Story 81. When I lived near Pittsburgh, I used to have a friend that worked the front desk at one of those day labor places that had lots of mentally unstable or homeless folks. He texted me one morning that one of his most unstable AMD unhoused workers called out because he had to take top secret government documents to the Canadian embassy. Story 82. This person was trapped in their home because there was a large insect on their front door. It was a crane fly mosquito hawk. Story 83. Worked with a guy who slipped and fell on ice in the parking lot and was out for several months with an injury. The first day that he returned, he sat through the morning meeting and then told the manager that he couldn't work because his hair hurt. He turned around and actually left. Story 84. I was working for a law firm and one of our interns who was a train wreck called me. Everyone called me. I was the problem solver. It went like this. He was supposed to be at work at 7:30 a.m. At around noon, I'd covered for him in the a.m., but this was before cell phones. Around 1996, I get a call. Collect. I accepted. He said, "Hey, I have a problem." I said, "I know, you know, showed, and your boss is pissed." And he said, "Well, this is worse. I got really tipsy at happy hour yesterday. My girlfriend locked me out of our house because she told me to grow up. So I obviously got drunker, jumped into the fountain downtown, cut my heel practically off, tied it up with my shirt, thought I'd catch a train to the hospital. This is in a town with zero public train service and sketchy bus service, and you really need to help me. So we are in Thomasville, GA. He said, "I'm bleeding to passing. My leg is broken." And at that point, I hear, "Sir, let me speak." I talked to security, who has arranged an airlift to Vanderbilt Hospital. He had hopped on a freight train, fell asleep, woke up in Nashville a bloody mess, and almost lost his leg. 3 days later, he left the hospital. His sister brought him back, and his boss had set up a train on his desk. Story 85. Her fat sister fell, and she's the only person who can lift her up off the floor. This girl who had to pick up the fat sister was no more than 100 pounds. Story 86. My boyfriend, after 3 months of starting at his current job, called out Saturday because I ended up in the ER with cardiac issues. Had to call out that Sunday because his mom dislocated her finger badly, pinky at a 90 angle sideways and bleeding, and we had to take a detour to the ER for her an hour before his shift. Told him that he needs to take pictures of both of our discharge papers because no way in hell are they going to believe this. Those were the only 2 days he was scheduled that week too. Thankfully, his bosses are amazing and told him to take care of us and himself and basically wrap us in bubble wrap till after his next shift LMAO edit to fix confusing typo that I didn't catch till now. Story 87. I once called not off work but to request WFH that day because I was expecting a delivery of highly perishable goods LOL. Story 88. Guy was late, not out. Boss said, "Why are you late?" And he said, "I don't know because my shirt is green." Story 89. Super Bowl Sunday, 1999. At approx 10 a.m., I looked my boss man square in the eyes and told him that I had shoot my britches and needed to go home. Story 90. I gave one once. My car caught fire on the Ben Franklin Bridge. Even better, I was stranded for several hours. Some fun. Story 91. A dump truck on I-35 dumped its contents, and she couldn't get off at an exit because there was a SWAT standoff at the exit closest to her, so she couldn't make it to work. You'd think that much action on a freeway in the downtown area of a major city would have made the news. Nope. And somehow she was the only person experiencing these issues on the same freeway all her coworkers were on. Story 92. One of my husband's employees didn't show up, so they were concerned and called her. She had gone on a drinking weekend and swore over the phone that it was Sunday morning, not Monday, as it truly was. And why were they calling her when she was off the clock? He had her off excuse written down as, thought the Monday was Sunday. Story 93. A squirrel got into my attic and fell down between the studs of my bedroom wall. I heard it scratching and crying, so I cut a hole in the wall and tried to get it to climb into a cat carrier I had. Well, that didn't work, and it was now loose in my house. I'm chasing it all over the house. My mom is standing on the couch screaming, and one of our 2 cats was going after it. All while I was due to be at work, I finally realized and had my mom call my manager. I finally caught it and released it into the tree line at my job at the time. Unbeknownst to me, my manager and everyone on duty and customers watched me release the squirrel, and when I walked in, I got a standing ovation. Then like 12 different people at different times through the shift made me tell the story. Story 94. I once had to ask off so I could drive my stepfather-in-law to the airport because his twin brother that nobody, including my mother-in-law, knew about had been lost at sea, and he needed to go work with the Coast Guard to handle the paperwork to have him declared dead. A few weeks later, his body washed up and I had to help him get from the airport so he could identify the body. It sounded like some soap opera bullshit. Story 95. A highway overpass had to be demolished due to significant damage from a crash involving a tractor trailer, a fuel truck, and another vehicle. And the highway was closed in both directions. Alternate routes got clogged up as well. Yes, this actually happened. Story 96. I can't believe I almost forgot. I sprained my ankle chasing a dog after the dumb dog got us sprayed by a skunk in my yard at 2 a.m. I didn't get any sleep because I'd been watching the fudge dog, and then around 7 a.m. I went to the ER to get checked out. Story 97. My father had a fatal heart attack at age 80. His third, so we knew it could happen. He had never been a sick man, and he had always worked. So the night that he died, I asked my mother if he was supposed to work that week. Yep, tomorrow. The next morning, I called his employer and identified myself, saying that he had died, and then I cracked up. I wasn't calling him in sick, I was calling him in dead. The receptionist didn't find it funny, but it was a 100 my father's type of humor. Story 98. A colleague wore jeans every day. One day he turned up late wearing smart clothes, so had obviously been at an interview. We asked why he was wearing that, and he said his mom hadn't ironed his jeans. Story 99. Not work, but college class. It was my freshman year, and I was taking an 8 a.m. statistics course taught by a real straight-laced, no-nonsense older professor. Worth mentioning that the classroom was on a different campus than the one I was roomed at, so I needed to take a bus. All told, I needed to be awake at 6 a.m. to make it comfortably. Well, one night I hit the hay at 10 p.m., and because it takes me a bit to fall asleep by 11 p.m., I'm finally drifting off. 2 hours later, I am awoken when the fire alarm blares out, and of course, everyone has to evacuate the dorm, head to a common area, and wait for the A-OK from the fire department. So at 1 a.m., I'm wide awake in the student commons, and it takes around 1 hour for the fire dep to make sure everything is all right. We are finally allowed back in at 2 a.m. after the fire dep determined that the cause of the fire alarm was that a stoned student had left a bag of popcorn in the microwave, and it caught fire. I decided in my sleep-deprived state that I wasn't going to bother waking up in 3-4 hours to try and do stats. So I emailed my professor a barely coherent email explaining what happened and that I wouldn't make it to class that day since I suspected I wouldn't learn anything. To my surprise, the next morning, I see an email reply saying he understood and sent me his notes for the day. When I next saw him in person, he laughed and said he gets so many bogus excuses that he appreciated the honesty and agreed that if I wasn't feeling it, I was right to just skip it. Moral of the story is be honest with your professors, folks. Story 100. Iokshe called my boss sobbing. She could barely understand me, saying I couldn't come to work because I lost my chicken on the bus. She was so confused, perplexed that we genuinely never spoke of it. To add some context, I worked in nursing at the time, had just gotten off of a surprise 16-hour shift, needed to take meds in order to sleep to be back at work in less than 80 hours, but I didn't have time to go grocery shopping yet. So I bought deli chicken at Safeway. I left my purse on the bus home because I was so tired, so I was chickenless and locked out of my house at 20 years old. And people wonder why there's a nursing shortage. Story 101. Had a guy call in saying he needed to take a half day off because he apparently OD'd. Told him to maybe take the whole day and I would just pay him for it. We never discussed it again when he came back to work. Story 102. The funniest one I've heard was when my colleague didn't come in for his shift until he was 5 hours late because he was winning a StarCraft tournament. Lemmiar, ooh. Story 103. I called off work because our garage had partially collapsed on my car. My boss wanted me to come into work anyway, as it couldn't have been that dangerous. She never believed us when we called off. But my car was the only thing keeping the garage up so we could get me Dad's car out, as well as his tools. We had the biggest snowfall of our area in years, and they ended up sending everyone home from work a few hours after start because the ceiling was threatening to collapse from the weight. Story 104. Overheard a VM from a mechanic I worked with. He was trying to put on the sick voice to call out, and he was standing too close to the casino floor. He was calling in sick to his job in Boulder, CO from the Las Vegas Strip. Story 105. Guy in the cubicle next to me called out one Monday because he was lost in the woods all weekend. He went camping with friends Saturday night who somehow left without him, and he ended up wandering around the woods until like 3 a.m. Monday morning. This was eastern Massachusetts, not exactly the frontier. He was like 2 miles from town, just a fat ass and a dope. Story 106. A guy called in saying his wife was at the hospital giving birth. Then the next week called in with the same excuse. Story 107. My uncle-in-law used to work at my shop. He called off one day because he said he dropped a Gatorade bottle on his toe and that it hurt too bad to stand. This was my favorite in a long line of questionable reasons for why he couldn't show up. Story 108. My coworker sliced her finger while cooking at home the night before. No, she didn't need nor seek stitches. She came into work and left almost immediately because her finger was wrapped in gauze like a fat sausage and she couldn't type. Story 109. Not a work absence, but lateness instead. On one of the main roads to where I work, there is a turtle crossing sign. This one dude claimed he was late because he had to wait for a turtle to cross the road. In reality, if there is a turtle crossing the road, you carefully just drive around the turtle and try not to hit it. This guy was acting like all traffic must stop for a turtle until it completely crosses the road. You know, like it's a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Story 110. I got stoned on my lunch break one day, and when I came back in, my eyes were so fudge red, I knew I couldn't get away with it, and we had a corporate visit going on at the time. So I hid in the bathroom for about 10 minutes and then just left and texted my boss saying I shoot my pants and had to go home. Told them I had a bag of red hot Cheetos that didn't agree with me. Story 111. One guy I worked with had so many crazy excuses that we actually kept a list among the rest of us. One of the wildest I can recall, without digging out the list, was when he found a dead cat behind his toilet. He didn't have a cat. Story 112. They went home with the wrong twin and were figuring out how to get out of it without upsetting the family. Story 113. Not me, but my mother. One of her employees once called her to let her know she would not be coming to work because her car was on fire. This particular employee had been caught lying before, with very obvious stuff too, so my mother didn't quite believe her at first. Lo and behold, this particular story was verified as true because it made it to the local news on TV that night. Story 114. Pretty close. A friend of mine had to call in absent to work because between his front door and his truck was an apple tree, and having a delightful morning snack on his apple tree was a grizzly bear. Story 115. Obama was campaigning at a community college a half-mile from my house. Secret Service blocked vehicles from exiting my street 30 minutes before his arrival. Unbeknownst to me, I explained I was going to turn away from the college, not towards, didn't matter. I had to call my new supervisor for my second day ever on the job. At least I was more established at a later job when Pope Francis was visiting Paraguay. I was finishing up some vacation time with some friends doing Peace Corps when I found out that the one main road in the country, a 2-laner, would basically be blocked for days due to people going to see the Pope. Couldn't get a ride to the airport and had to message my boss that I'd be a few days late due to Pope traffic. Story 116. My boss's hamster allegedly died, and she had to take the body to the vet for cremation. Driving back late into the office, she spotted a traveler, gypsy horse in a field that looked in poor condition, so she had to phone the RSPCA and wait with the horse until they arrived. Her boss was not impressed. Story 117. I worked a part-time job that I didn't care for much. I had been there about a month and had a vacation coming up. We were leaving on Tuesday. I called in Monday so I could mow, pack, just get things ready to leave. The manager asked why I wasn't coming in. I didn't really care to lie, so I said, I have to get ready for my vacation. He was pissed. I never went back after the vacation, nor did I tell them I wasn't coming back. Story 118. I once had a guy actually show up to work, and when he arrived 10 minutes late, he said he was hit by a bus on the way to work and needed to go home. Wasn't even fake limping or anything. He was walking completely normal. No scrapes, and thought I'd believe he was hit by a bus. Story 119. Manage teams globally, and it's weird that folks in India tended to call off for platelet imbalances. They'd be back to work in a day, and that was that. I mean, I've never called off sick due to platelet issues, but that's me in the US, who knows? Also, Germans are weird when it comes to health. They'll call off for odd reasons related to blood as well. Personally, I don't care. Take all the time off you want, just be responsible for your work. Healthcare fibs can be fun. Story 120. It was the honesty. He was in AE because he'd gotten up late and fell down the stairs trying to put his pants on. Story 121. Dude called me at work and said he had to get a boil lanced next to his balloon knot. I told him he didn't have to go into that much detail. Story 122. My parrot is lost and I'm staying home looking for her. And it was legit truth. My African gray parrot got out a partially open door and I never found her. I was heartbroken. Story 123. I once called in because there was a body in the street in front of my house. Wouldn't have been too bad except it was blocking my car in, and then all the emergency vehicles blocked me in. Had a trap house down the block, so most likely it was someone that OD'd. Story 124. His balls were cramping. Dude literally called in at least once a week for years, and somehow it was allowed. Fudge you, Nick. Story 125. This is one of my favorite things ever. Now I'm Danish, but I'm going to give Sweden credit where it's due. While being gay had been legalized in Sweden since 1944, in 1979 it was classified as a disease. That year, the RSFL, Swedish Federation for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender and Queer Rights, had planned a sit-in on August 29th at the National Board of Health and Welfare to change that error in judgment. Some of the individuals who took part decided to call in sick, or rather said call in gay, so they could take part in the protest, with one woman even managing to get sick benefits from Social Security on that basis. Their intervention worked, and on October 19, 1979, the classification was removed. Story 126. A guy who worked for me would never miss a whole day work, but he would come incredibly late. But the fun part was, he had some of the most creative excuses for being late that you almost look forward to him being late. For instance, he was caught at a railroad crossing because the Barnum and Bailey circus train was leaving town. He was late because he stopped to give somebody CPR on the way to work. He was late because he skidded on a dead pigeon. He was late because someone's pet iguana got loose. He ran over it and it got caught up in his wheel well. One day he just arrived late and he was soaking wet from head to toe shoes, actually squeaking with water coming out of them with no explanation, and it wasn't raining. Story 127. Male employee called off because his wife was pregnant and he himself was experiencing morning sickness. Wanted accommodations to be late to work for the duration of his wife's pregnancy because he had morning sickness. Answer. This may actually be a real thing. It is called Kuvad syndrome or sympathetic pregnancy, where expectant father experiences some of the same symptoms as his expecting partner. It is debated as to whether it is a psychosomatic thing, physical symptoms caused by a mental effect, or a biological thing caused by hormonal changes. Studies have shown that men who cohabitate with pregnant women do experience hormonal changes though. Story 128. How about my own from years ago? I may have a concussion thanks to my cat. The story. My apartment bedroom door did not latch correctly, and my kitties had a bad habit of running across my wife and I in our sleep. So, we instead started using a laundry bag to barricade the door shut to prevent being scratched up. At around 5 a.m. one morning, my calico was persistent and had mostly broken down the barricade. I got up sleepily to fix the barrier and got too close to the door while the cat was lining up a charge and got hit right above my eye with the metal doorknob. I got dizzy, nauseous, and saw stars along with the pain. My cat is there rubbing and chirpy happy as I'm feeling like I just got punched in the face. I ended up going to the doctor to get checked out after calling out. Everything was okay, just told to rest that day. But no one would have believed me if I didn't have the serious lump just above my eye that grew by the next morning. Story 129. Serum. Ooh, this is my time to shine. I have two, and both were me. While working for Subway and living in a community with only one road in and out, a hurricane stranded 6 manatees in a pond on a nearby golf course. And it was a whole thing to relocate them back to the bay. I had to call my boss and tell him I could not come to work because the road was closed for everything but emergencies and the police didn't consider my work an emergency. I literally had to have a cop talk to my boss and tell him they weren't letting anyone through, so I called out because there were manatees in the goddamn road. The second was when I worked for Taco Bell, and the car seat warmer on my passenger side spontaneously caught fire while I was driving. I pulled over, called the fire dep. They put it out. At some point, remembered to call my boss, who asked when I would be in. I again had to have a firefighter tell him my car wasn't drivable, and they weren't even going to release it to be towed until they were sure it wasn't going to reignite. Story 130. I had someone that gets upset after every election and has to stay home to process through their feelings. Story 131. Payday was advertised as being on Saturday. That is, the checks were mailed on Friday, and usually the check would arrive in the Saturday mail. It would arrive early enough that the employee to go to their local check cashing bodega and get their cash minus the high fee. Sometimes the check would not come in the mail until Monday. There were a few employees who would call me on Saturday to complain that they did not get paid. I would say that the check would just come on Monday. That isn't good enough because they want to cash it and go to the bars today. And as they put it, the honeys were out on the weekend, not on Monday. They want me to bring them their money and they would cash the check Monday and pay it back. Also, it was not fair that I got my check handed to me directly at the office on Friday. Since they would not be getting their money in time to go out this weekend, they would refuse to work until they got their check in their hand. That means they were calling out from work for all shifts until the mail came Monday, usually 1 or 2 shifts. These same guys would then call 2 weeks later to ask why their next paycheck was smaller than usual. Story 132. A lady called in and said she cleaned her tub with Tilex, forgot to rinse it off, took a bath, and subsequently burned her labia. So, burnt labia. Story 133. I burned my foot very badly on my Foreman grill, and I now need someone to come and bring me into work. Story 134. She called from jail. She beat up her elderly mother in the front yard. She also wanted bail money. Sorry, you just partied too hard, your one call. I tell my 5 adult kids and husband, there is no bail money. P.S. Professional job. I called HR and started paperwork for termination. I can't have someone with a record handling narcotics. It's in the contract. Story 135. It wasn't unusual or calling off work per se, but it was true, word for word. Yeah, this is insert name, and I won't be in today because I quit. Thanks. Story 136. I wasn't this guy's supervisor, but his supervisor came into my office because he couldn't keep to himself that he got this call. It was a factory job, and the person in question was known for being a user of the crystal. His wife was a known stripper and adult worker. He called in to say that he was going to be in late. He was watching someone fudge his wife against the light pole outside his trailer, and when she was done, he would come in. Story 137. On my way out, my neighbor's dog somehow got into my car and refused to get out. I tried luring him with treats, but he ended up falling asleep in the back seat. I couldn't just leave him there because it was hot, and by the time I found his owner, he'd already missed half the day. Figured it was better to just deal with the situation than show up smelling like a wet golden retriever. Story 138. I called off once as a teenager because a pair of Jordans I had ordered was scheduled to be delivered that day. They didn't come that day. They came the next day while I was at work. Story 139. My husband had to call off after he picked up a 9-week-old kitten out of the middle of rush hour traffic on a busy road as he was commuting to work. She'd been thrown there with her sibling who was eliminate before he could get to them. He brought her home and we took her to the vet to have her checked out. And then she came back home to stay. She lived with us for 14 good years and used to drape herself around his shoulders and appeared on more than one Zoom call. He has her paw print tattooed on his chest where she'd rested. And I will never stop loving him for being the sort of person who rescues kittens or iguanas. But that's another story, and he didn't have to call off work for that. Story 140. I've had people call out due to the weather, even though it was a sunny, cloudless day. Hadn't had any significant weather in weeks. Story 141. I swear a guy I work with has a random excuse generator. He's called in before saying that his dog was depressed because his wife was out of town and he needed to be there with the dog. He has used so many excuses that when he actually had a minor stroke, a lot of people didn't believe it at first. Story 142. Guy came in like 2 hours late to the construction site, went up to the boss and said, "Man, the Behind the Music Aerosmith was on. Have you seen it?" Boss said, "Go see what's on now." Story 143. My dad had an employee call one morning and say she couldn't come in because she forgot where she parked her car. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care.